Dr. Jake Nichols has focused his career on breaking down barriers to treatment and improving outcomes for individuals and families struggling with substance use disorder. Through his 15-year struggle with substance use, Dr. Nichols has found his calling in the field of SUD medicine and has established himself as a key resource in the pharmaceutical industry, managed care, clinical practice, education, and family patient support. He is also the author of Unfit for Recovery, Fighting Addiction in an Unforgiving World, available now on Amazon. Please welcome Dr. Jake Nichols.
Wow. I need a copy of that video, please. And I want to know who the incredible British woman was that was narrating it. Incredible job. Good morning, everybody. That wasn't bad for a Saturday morning. Not bad at all. It is truly an honor to be with you guys today and to share with you my journey, personally and professionally, as you heard, through substance use, but also to talk about the theme of this meeting, which is connections and network. And it was really interesting to me, and there's another key point here that's very important to understand, that when I was asked to come and speak, I asked Crystal, I said, well, what's the theme? You know, I can always get up and tell my story, but a lot of people have heard my story. You can read my story. Well, the theme is the importance of connection and networking. And one of the things that I have found through my journey that is extremely important to understand, and it doesn't matter what you believe in terms of a God or a higher power or karma, whatever it may be, good comes back to serve you when you do good. That's a very important piece to understand. And you'll understand as I go through what I mean by that. The universe returns kindness, and that also plays into your networks. So let me start off by explaining again how I kind of got to where I am. I graduated from MCPHS University in 2000 with my PharmD. I entered a community pharmacy residency program with Walgreens. And honestly, my career took off. It took off to a level that I never could have anticipated. I was doing things that were cutting edge at the time. And I'm going to expose what my age is here. I was the first group of pharmacists in Massachusetts to administer vaccinations. And we all gathered in a room, and APHA came, and they taught us how to administer vaccinations. And it was interesting because doing that affords you a lot of attention. People look to you as a leader in the profession, and you start building connections that way. And there are people that you encounter, that you interact with, that there's something about them that you may not necessarily be able to explain what it is, but you feel a connection with that person. And again, I don't want to get too ethereal here, but there's something to that. And there's some very personal stories for people in this room as it relates to me and those types of connections. And from a very early period in my life, I decided I was going to pay attention to that. And I have to credit my dad for instilling that in me. There were a couple of things he always preached. The first and most important was, and he always made it the school analogy because it was started when I was very young. He said, you treat the janitor at the school with the same respect you treat the principal. You talk to him exactly the same way. And that always stuck with me. And my dad and his brothers always practiced that. There was never any wavering from that. My dad also said, make sure you pay attention to people that come into your life, because they come into your life for a reason. It may be a good reason, that there's something you can help them with at some point in their journey, or there may be something that they can help you with in your journey. Just as important as that is you learn things not to do. Pay attention to how folks treat other people. Pay attention to how managers manage their employees. And decide what works and what doesn't work. And again, for whatever reason, I chose to listen to that and to take that to heart. So I had built a strong network of people just based on my attitudes, my positivity. I was the funny guy. I like to have fun. I like to make jokes. I like to party, as you can imagine. And a lot of those things intersected. And again, that would also play a role later when I had to try and utilize some of that network and those connections that I had made along the way. And once my substance use really started to manifest from a clinical perspective, it became time to take advantage of some of that network and take advantage of some of those connections. And it was interesting because I had always thought of my network as a currency. And the thought is, well, I have to save it. I have to save up. I have to hold on to it until I need to use it when it's necessary. And I need to spend it wisely. I need to decide, is this something that I need to cash in at this point? And at the time when my substance use came to light in 2010, after a 15-year history, I got a very interesting response from my social circle, from my peers. And as you can imagine, again, this is 2010, a lot of my peers turned their back on me. People that I thought would stand up for me. People that I thought would help me get through this. They weren't there. I could try to cash in my network. I could try to cash in a favor through those connections, but they didn't want my money or my currency because I was now labeled as somebody who had, quote unquote, betrayed the profession. I had taken advantage of my status as a well-recognized and respected pharmacist. So the point with that is you can't always cash it in when you need to. And I had to start to build a whole new network. And as luck would have it, God would have it, karma would have it, it was the best network I ever built, personally and professionally. And where it started for me was going into addiction treatment, into a field where as a pharmacist, I had no real knowledge of this disease state, because I had a half-hour lecture on addiction that was dumped into my psychiatry module where we talked about antabuse and methadone. And it was presented as a potential complicating factor in treating behavioral health issues, not as a standalone disease. I didn't know many providers in that field because at that time it was still a relatively emerging field. I had worked at Boston Medical Center with some of the greatest researchers and clinicians in this field, very early pioneers. But I had also done some things there, including writing fake prescriptions and diverting controlled substances that, sorry pal, we can't help you, believe it or not. So I had to start to build my own network. And again, when you put out good into the universe, it comes back. And it's the most interesting part of my journey to me that really convinced me that things do happen for a reason was the fact very early on when I lost my license, when I was charged with 500 plus felonies, my marriage ended, I declared bankruptcy. I got a phone call one day from a clinician, a therapist. And he said, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm at the local hospital. I heard from a friend of yours you need some help. I said, why are you calling me? He says, I can't tell you why I'm calling you. I just had a need to call you and offer that. I said, I don't have any money. I'm broke. I don't have a job. He said, I don't want your money. Just come see me. That gentleman was in recovery. And when I was writing the book and I was interviewing him, he told me that in his 40 years as a therapist, he had never called proactively a patient that he had heard needed help. But something that day told him to call, putting good back out into the universe. And you hear a lot in the addiction space, we like to pass it along, right? That's a big part of the 12-step community. Give it back. Maybe that's what he was doing, but why did he do it to me? That opened this network of people that he connected me to. Get me into treatment. Get me better. Get me back on that track. And I wanted to work in this field. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I didn't know what that looked like at the time, but I trusted in the universe. And there's a little more to that, because it's very hard for somebody to do at that stage in the disease. We wonder why it takes people so many tries at sobriety to maintain it long term. The answer is because your brain is wired to tell you you don't need help, that you don't have a disease. Literally. This is not a hypothesis. This is not a theory. We've proven this over and over again in animal models, functional MRI studies. My brain is wired very differently than 90% of you in this room. And for whatever reason, again, I got in touch with the right network of people because I put that energy out there, and it got me on the path to recovery. And it started this incredible career that I could never have imagined is so fulfilling. And there's still a lot of damage that I'm repairing. I've been in recovery 13 years. It's a perpetual process. People always ask, do you think about it? Do you ever have cravings? Every day. It's the first thing I think about every morning when I get up. My brain is wired anytime that I have anxiety or doubts or emotions that are hard to process to tell me to use drugs, to go back to opioids, to go back to stimulants, because it will numb that out. And that's what it did for me. It completely voided me of emotion. And not to get too deep into it, but I had grown up in a generation, in a culture that expressing emotion was something we didn't do. It was private. It was almost a sense of weakness, to be honest. You don't cry. Knock that off. What are you crying about? Why would you talk about that stuff outside of the family? You know, and that's something my family, my dad still struggles with. You know, very early on when I went public with my addiction, my father got very upset. That's nobody's business. That's our business as a family to discuss. That's cultural. That's generational. He's gotten a lot better, truthfully, and very, very supportive. So as I entered the field and started kind of finding my way, I was encouraged to go out and share my story. And the first time this person called me, the woman was the director of continuing education at Northeastern University at the time. And she's a dear friend of mine. And she called me, and after, you know, they started to spread the word that this had happened and everything was going on, and, you know, very kind woman, very non-judgmental. And she said, you know, I heard what happened. I hope you're getting the help you need. I think you need to go out and educate pharmacists on addiction and the treatment of addiction. And I said, okay. So when somebody goes up and does a continuing ed program, they have credentials behind them as to why they're up there talking about that topic, right? I said, what am I going to tell people? She said, tell them the truth. And at that time, very early in my recovery, I was only in there a couple of months. My brain is still wired to respond reactively. And the two words that I used were very colorful, used very commonly in Boston. I won't repeat them here. And I hung up the phone. And again, it wasn't a malicious, thoughtful action. It was a reaction. And the reaction was based on the fact that I interpreted what she was saying was, you should stand up in front of your peers and admit that you're a drug addict. And I said, how could you even be suggesting that? And again, that energy started to come out, and I started to pay attention. And as I was kind of trying to find my way and deal with my personal issues, people that I encountered, friends, peers, people in treatment, started saying, wow, what a terrible thing has happened. You're the last person I'd expect that from. And every time somebody said that to me, it was like a punch in the gut. And I said, why would you say that? And they said, well, you're a young, educated healthcare professional. You're very well respected. Why would you do that? And after literally about the 12th time, I said, you know what? I need to listen to this. Somebody is telling me to do something with this. And so I did. Those connections that I gained from doing that have been absolutely invaluable. Absolutely invaluable. For me personally, and strengthening my recovery, but also for professional opportunities. And as I started to get out there, and I started working as a medical science liaison in the pharma world because, again, this is 2010, 2011, things like buprenorphine are really starting to take off. There's a huge focus on treating addiction. We have a few meds that come to market that are approved for the treatment of different substance use disorders. There's a lot of great opportunities. Pharmacists are great candidates for MSL jobs, medical science liaison jobs. A pharmacist in recovery working as an addiction medical liaison brings tremendous credibility. And I never thought of it from that point at the time. I wasn't going, well, I got the street cred. That's the reason I'm going to get this job. I was thinking, okay, I can share that so people know that I understand what their patients are going through. And of course they do. It does bring a degree of credibility. I've had CEOs of pharma companies I work for go, you're our most valuable employee because of your honesty, because of what you bring, how pure you are. And the point is, you don't have to go out and become a drug addict and then go into recovery to get a good job in addiction medicine. You don't. The honesty is what people value. When you make a mistake, you admit it. And as we say in 12-step, we promptly make amends where we can. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you were wrong, that you made a bad decision, and apologizing to somebody because you hurt them. I am not a die-hard 12-step guy. You're not going to go out and see my car with a one day at a time bumper sticker on it or anything like that. I think it's very valuable for the right person, and occasionally I do go to meetings. I will take people to meetings that want to go, that are new to recovery. But if you've never read the 12 steps and the 12 principles, and they're pretty much the same between NA and AA, give them a read. It'll take you 3 minutes. And you'll see the universal nature of what they're suggesting in those 24 statements. They go a very long way in life. And again, I can look at it from the addiction perspective, but I also look at it from the professional perspective and what it has helped me gain. Because whether I do it formally or informally, I try to adhere to those principles on a regular basis. Honesty, putting good out into the world, and very simple things. When you make eye contact with somebody, do you say hello? I'm sure a lot of you in this room do. Most of you keep your head down and walk away. When you're in an elevator, somebody gets off, do you tell them to have a good day or a good night? Very, very small things. Again, I don't want to get too, like I say, ethereal here. But that's putting good out into the world. I promise you that will come back to serve you. Promise you. As time rolled on, I still had a lot of challenges, but I maintained positivity. And the reason I was able to maintain that positivity was because of my network, because of my connections. I chose very carefully who to surround myself with. One of my therapeutic interventions that was recommended to me when I was early in treatment was to go join a gym. And I did. And before that, I was the guy that had always signed up for the gym and was basically just giving them my money every month and not going. Well, this became a very big part of my recovery. Not just because of the exercise, but because of the people I met there, who are my closest friends today, 10 plus years later. And the reason that they're my closest friends is because I know if I'm struggling, whether it's personally or professionally, I can call upon these guys for two things: for support and to set me straight, because I'm not always right. I may have a complaint about something, I may see something one way, and I'll hit these guys up and we just have a WhatsApp chat that we literally go back and forth all day on, and I'll put this out there. And it's almost like my Jedi council. They'll tell me, dude, you need to relax. Not a big deal, calm down. Usually more colorful terms, or, you're absolutely right, step back, take a deep breath, put it aside for a couple of days and go back to it. Those are the people I sought out. Those are the people I found. It goes further than that. That therapist who reached out to me for whatever reason on that day is one of my closest friends as well. I no longer see him in a professional or a treatment capacity, but he is now more of a peer. He'll always be a mentor, and he's retired, and he's full of wisdom. And again, he's in recovery. I think he just hit 40 years. And he's into a lot of very interesting things. And one of the things he talks about, and again, I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about this, but he was explaining it to me, it makes sense. He was talking about people have a vibration frequency. Has anybody heard of this? The frequency at which you vibrate will determine what good comes to you. And again, my response was first, I'm like, obviously your drug use is catching up to you because this is crazy. And I read a little bit into it, and it makes sense. And look into it. It's a very interesting kind of concept. It's the same thing that I was preaching, just looked at from a different perspective. You put good out into the universe, it will be returned to you. As my career grew and my network grew, because what my job consisted of for a good portion of the last 13 years, including right now, is going out into the treatment community and interacting with clinicians and patients that are involved in the treatment of substance use. And you meet some of the most amazing, selfless, pure individuals in healthcare when you engage in addiction medicine. It is a very unique area of medicine. They've done a couple of studies. There's probably 60 to 70% of people that work in addiction treatment had a firsthand experience, meaning either themselves or a first-degree family member, relative. So a lot of these folks get it. And you make friends with a lot of these folks because it's, part of it, yes, is the recovery to recovery thing. But again, I promise you, you don't have to be in recovery to effectively work in this field. You just need to be a human being. It's that simple. But you make those connections. And clinicians I met 10 years ago still call me to check in. How are you doing? They call, hey, I got an interesting patient. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? When I go to a conference, I meet up with these folks. We have dinner, we have coffee. I keep that relationship going. And it's not so much I'm thinking, well, I may need that at some point. They may need me at some point. That's what is more important to me. But you keep those connections going because you'll never know when they need to come back. When it'll just come to you. You don't usually have to seek them out. And I'll give you a few more examples as we go along. That network has been absolutely invaluable in terms of professional opportunities. And one of the things is that this is not a plant. I always planned on talking about this. One of the most pivotal moments in my life was in May 2011. When I walked into the APHA SUD Institute for the very first time. And again, you talk about things happening for a reason. The first time I ever gave a continuing ed program on treatment of opioid use disorder and shared my personal struggles, there was a pharmacist in the audience who had been going religiously to the Institute for years. And I had never met this guy. He chased me down as I was leaving the program. He says, you need to go to this thing. I'd never heard of it. And at the time, it was a much bigger, it wasn't an APHA initiative, it was under the Utah School of Medicine. So it wasn't, APHA had kind of carved out their niche. There were pharmacists, doctors, dentists, nurses, all healthcare disciplines, an amazing experience. I said, I don't have the money. He said, don't worry about the money. I'll pay for you to go. So I went, and I walked in the door, having no idea what to expect, and I turned the corner, and one of my friends, a former classmate, was staring me directly in the face, and that was Keith Marciniak. Now, Keith was very good friends with my roommate in college. Keith and I hung out. The look on Keith's face when he saw me, not expecting that, was one of surprise, to say the least. What are you doing here? What do you think I'm doing here? And the incredible part about that is Keith and I rekindled a friendship that had always been there, but we had something else now. We had a shared love of something. And I had no idea that he was overseeing this and organizing this from that standpoint. You think that's coincidence? I don't. Absolutely don't. You put that energy out there, it comes back to you. Now I'm a very big part of that program. I help plan it every year. And if you've never been, it's one of the most incredible experiences you'll ever have. You don't have to be dealing with substance use, whether it's you or your family. It's an incredible experience to learn and to hear from people and to get a real experience as to what it's about. But again, putting Keith aside, I met dozens of pharmacists that were just like me. I had no idea. I thought this was just like a CE program. And I go in and I meet 20, 30 other people that have been through what I've been through. And they had gone through it 10 or 20 years ago, some of them. And the wisdom that I got from them was obviously invaluable. Because at that stage early in your recovery, you think you're the lowest form of scum on the earth for what you did. 513 felonies, drug diversion, writing fake prescriptions. You betrayed your profession. And then you hear some of these guys' stories. And it's not a competition, but I get nothing on some of these other folks. My story is a joke compared to what some other people have been through. And again, not a competition, but it helps to normalize. That was important. Network. I started going in 2011. I go every year. I would never miss it. And we talk, that group of folks talks regularly. We have a meeting every Sunday night. And it's not a full meeting where we're busting open the big book and going through all the principles, but we talk. We keep each other on that road. I know that they're there if I need them, without question. Time will progress. Things will change. I hate to break it to you, but the vision that you have for how your life is going to turn out, it's not going to be that way. I can promise you that. Not necessarily a bad thing. What I will ask you to do is to keep an open mind and to pay attention to the signs. Again, people will come into your life. You have two choices. You can either dismiss them, or you can do a little bit of examination and decide, is there a reason that this person came into my life? What can I learn from them? How can I help them? And again, you never know. But I ask you to give that some thought with each and every person, especially if you see that person on a repeated basis. And it's not expected. You pop up at a conference, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. I haven't seen you since the last conference. You know? Think about those things. Pay attention to those things. Put good out there. It will come back. As my career progressed, I'm 47, I have two boys, 14 and 11. And in May 2020, my world came crashing down yet again. I had 10 years of recovery under my belt. I had an incredible, incredible foundation for life. I had a great job. I had tremendous opportunities in the substance use field. I was engaged to an incredible individual, and life was great. I had a great relationship with my ex-wife, with my kids. My kids were healthy, doing very well. And literally in the course of a week, that all went away. Didn't see any of it coming. I lost my job. We're in the middle of COVID. And that individual said, you know what? I don't want to do this. We're not getting married. End of story. That's why I wrote this book. I wrote the book because I once again, after 10 years in recovery, thinking I had it all figured out, was facing a bottle of pills. I had purchased a bottle of pills of opioids. They were stacked on my counter because you start to feel sorry for you. You know, I don't deserve this. How could this all happen? How could this change in the blink of an eye? And that was the first mistake I made, was feeling sorry for myself. And I hadn't done that in a long time. But guess what? I had an incredible support network. And I knew that I could count on those folks to pull me out of this. One of the old adages they say in AA is the phone weighs 1,000 pounds. It's hard to pick up that phone to call somebody and say, I need help. But that was one thing I had abandoned long ago. I had been brought up that we don't ask for help. We figure things out on our own. I'm sure many of you, by nature of what you're in school for, are the same way. Healthcare providers, that's who we are. We're selfless. We don't need help. We take care of everybody else. Don't make that mistake. It will come back to haunt you. I had people to pull me out of it. Friends, clinicians. And writing this book. And the idea of writing this book was to determine, how did I get back here? How is it possible I did all this work, and how did I end up right back where I was? And I didn't relapse, but I very well could have. I literally had the meds ready to go. And it caused me to refocus things. And it reminded me that I have a lot of resources, I have a lot of opportunities. It also was kind of a midlife crisis, to be honest with you. Because, again, I'm 47, I have no retirement, I have no savings because of my addiction. It is what it is. I'm still working to repair those things. So I started to think, what am I going to do longer term so I'm able to leave something, some sort of legacy for my children financially? Because that's important to me. My oldest is in 8th grade. In 4 years, he'll be going to college. I want to help him pay for that. As it stands right now, it'd be very difficult for me to do that. So I start thinking, what else can I do? And this is where I want to transition a little bit into entrepreneurship. Don't be afraid to try something new. It's a very daunting perspective to think, oh my God, I want to start a company, I want to do, how do I do this? Well, as connections would have it, I was thinking of doing this, and I was thinking of doing it in addiction treatment. I wanted to build some technology that would help facilitate the use of evidence-based treatment for addiction. Because it's literally the wild, wild west of medicine in terms of what they do out there. Whether it's meds, treatment, horse therapy, whatever it might be. And I am not a finance guy. I've never done anything. I've never raised money. But I said, you know what? I'll figure it out. I'll try it. I have a physician friend in Philadelphia, very well-known addiction doc. We got together, we tried doing this, and we went out. And I started to find investors. And you know what they all said? Great idea. Definitely needed. I don't see what the money in it is. I don't see what my return on the investment is. And again, not to get off topic here, but that's a big reason why you don't see the Mercks, the Pfizers of the world going into addiction medicine. They don't see the money in it for the treatment. So I struggled for a few years and trying to figure out, again, where am I going to go? And I'd never abandoned it, but I just kept my options open. And a year ago, one of my classmates called me up. This is somebody I'd worked with. We definitely kept in touch. We had very similar personalities. We'd gotten in a lot of trouble together throughout the years. And he said, I got an idea I want to run by you. And I said, all right, let's do it. And he laid out this thing that he had started talking to this guy about called precision medicine. You've heard that term, right? Overused term, right? You hear it, it's a buzz term, right? But what this guy had was an AI-based platform that would mimic human physiology. And this guy had been building this out for 30, 40 years, just research, complete research genius. And he'd found some biomarkers, not genetic tests, but biomarkers that will determine whether or not you respond to certain drug therapies, very expensive drug therapies. And he was like, I don't want to do this. I wouldn't even know how to begin to sell this. Would you guys be interested in doing it? And I'm going, well, this seems interesting. Way out of my wheelhouse, not addiction related. So I said, well, what else can we do? He said, well, you're in the addiction field. What is needed in addiction? I said, it would be great if we had something that told us whether or not a patient was a good candidate for methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone, our 3 FDA-approved treatment options. He says, we can do that. Just get me the data. So we started talking about all these things, and we started building this business plan and this idea around this, putting out the energy. And you talk about connections, but we started talking to people about this. We got somebody interested. He said, you know what? I'll invest in this. And he gave us a big chunk of money. And he started talking to other people that he knew might be interested. And in 90 days, we raised $1.5 million to get this thing started. And we're moving into our official seed round the first of the year. Connections. That's all it is. Networking. Having a vision of what you want to do. And most importantly, taking a chance. Don't be afraid. Failure is not a negative thing. It is a learning opportunity. And I'm sure some of you subconsciously rolled your eyes when I said that, because we hear that all the time. If you make it an issue to evaluate every hardship and every quote-unquote failure that you experience and learn from it, I'll make you another promise. It will benefit you beyond anything you can imagine. Pay attention, focus, pivot when you need to. Be resilient. Don't let things get you down. Keep moving ahead. I would be doing a disservice if I didn't mention if you struggle with behavioral health or addiction issues which are impeding you from being able to do that, don't be afraid to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a weakness. It's not a moral failure. At least 10 to 15% of you in this room are going to struggle with substance use at some point, just by the numbers. And I hope I'm wrong. But again, I'm not saying this is, people going, well, am I doomed? No, that's not what I'm saying. Just saying by the numbers, that's population. With healthcare professionals, we've never been able to quite tease it out, but it's clearly more than the average population because of access, because of stress, which I don't need to talk about given what's going on with some of the larger organizations in our profession right now. That's a reflection of we're acknowledging we can't do it this way anymore. We need help. And we need to take a stand on things, and I respect that tremendously, tremendously. So with that, I'm going to stop for sake of time, and I want to be able to take some questions. But again, I wish you all the very best. The fact that you're here alone says that you're driven, you're motivated, you have high expectations of yourself. Don't ever compromise that. It will benefit you in the end. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you for sharing your story today. And Dr. Nichols is the author of Unfit for Recovery. Do you want to remind students where they can purchase this book?
Yes, you can purchase this on Amazon.com. Very easy. Just look. The quickest way to find it is Unfit for Recovery, Jake Nichols. It's available as Kindle and as a paperback version. I haven't found the time yet to record the audiobook, but people have demanded it, I guess because of my Boston accent. They want to hear it. So at some point I'll have to do that. But that's something I didn't realize how much work. Actually, you can't just set it up on your home computer and do this. You got to go to like a studio and stuff. So I'll get there.
And lucky for everyone watching and attending in person, we actually have signed copies of his book, and we will be handing them out as prizes throughout the day. So make sure you guys are staying active and engaged for a chance to win. And then I think we have some time for some Q&A. So I have some questions from our online watchers, and then we have some questions from the audience as well.
Great.
But the first question is from a student online. What is something that surprised you, whether positive or negative, about courageously sharing your story?
Wow. Great question. I'll give you an example of each. The positive side, and again, the first time I gave that talk, it was at the end of the year. It was a continuing ed program. And of course, when I looked in that room, there were former professors, classmates, former, people I had worked with. Of course, it was, half the room were people I knew. And I honestly had no idea what the response was going to be. And when I finished, the line of people that had waited to congratulate me on sharing my story, as well as the progression of my recovery, was not something I expected. I expected maybe a few head nods, fist bumps, but I never expected that. The negative side of that, you have some people that resent the fact that you are sharing this. And there can be many reasons for that. I'll never forget, there was one guy at a CE program within the same year who came in, and as I was talking, he opened a newspaper, and he started reading a newspaper, and of course he's sitting right here. And as I'm talking, he's making comments under his breath. He said something at one point like the board's ever going to give this guy his license back. What a scumbag. Literally saying things like that, like thinking I couldn't hear it. And you still get some people like that. There have been times where, very recently, where I was denied employment because of my history. And again, 13 years later, I never pleaded guilty or was convicted of any of those felonies, and my license has no restrictions on it, my pharmacy license. But yet it still cost me a job with a major organization in our profession, because they weren't comfortable with what had gone on in the past. So there are many, the positives certainly outweigh the negatives, but the negatives still rear their ugly head from time to time. And that's something I have to deal with.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to the audience here in DC for a chance to ask Dr. Nichols a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, phenomenal question. The question was, how do we best support our loved ones who are struggling with addiction? As you can imagine, this is one of the top 3 questions I get. And it's a tough one for me to answer because I really wish I had a concise, quick response to that could guarantee some sort of a positive outcome. And I don't. But what I've done is I've observed over the years. I'm involved in a lot of parent family support groups. And I can tell you what does work and what doesn't work. What does not work is negativity, being punitive, being judgmental, being negative. Again, we want to have boundaries and we don't want to enable people. But when we criticize them and we shun them, it perpetuates substance use because you just want to further bury those emotions. On the other hand, and the tougher piece is getting somebody to the point where they're ready to accept your help. And I'll tell you, in 99 out of 100 cases, that is a long-term process. And I call it the breadcrumb phenomenon. You drop breadcrumbs. It's all in your approach. And it doesn't matter if it's a peer, a roommate, family member. You start by saying, I don't know what's going on. I don't want to make any assumptions, but something is different about you, and I'm concerned. If you want to talk, or if I can help you in any way, my door is always open. And again, let's be realistic. You're not going to get somebody just jump up and hug you and say, yes, thank you. Sometimes you will. Sometimes you will, because people aren't expecting that. From our profession, and again, I know you're not going to go to those lengths, but when you're talking to patients, it's the same thing. Just expressing that you're not judgmental, that you're there to help them any way you can, opens a lot of doors therapeutically. And going back to those in your social circle, you're going to have to repeat that. Every time something comes up, we don't ignore it, but we don't chastise it. Hey, this is another example of something I've seen that's just not you. I'm concerned. Again, I just want to remind you, I'm here. That is really, in my opinion, the only thing that works. You know, we've done studies where we've looked at people that have gone to treatment voluntarily and people that we've forced into treatment through the legal system. Do you think there's any difference in outcomes? There isn't. People have to want to do it. And that's very hard when you have a disease that's rewired your brain to tell you you don't need to do it. So it's repetition and expressions of concern. Yep.
All right, we have another question here. So I know you mentioned the APHA Institute on Substance Use Disorders in your talk. Do you mind explaining to them a little bit more of what that looks like and what it is?
Yeah. So at the end of May every year, we still go back out to the University of Utah. And it's actually a better program now because it's much more intimate. And we've done a greater job at kind of bringing that setting more to that level. And it is not a CE program. It is not an educational program solely. That's certainly a part of it, and it's a big part of it. You will learn the basics of addiction. You will learn how we treat addiction. You will learn what the hot topics and issues are facing the addiction treatment community. That's this much of it, this much. The bigger part, the more important piece, is you will be immersed in discussions about addiction and how those of us in recovery manage our addictions. You will hear stories of addiction. You'll hear stories of perseverance. You'll learn the different modalities from peer support, 12-step, and how we do that. We actually host meetings every night of the program. We do an AA, we do an NA, and we do an Al-Anon meeting. And those are open to everybody to speak. And it is some of the most emotional, therapeutic interactions that you'll ever experience. There is no program that is like it. And again, I'm saying that not just from a pharmacy perspective, I'm saying that from an addiction treatment perspective. I have been to hundreds, if not thousands, of programs that claim to be like this. There is nothing even close to what we do in Utah every year.
And I think we have one more question from our online viewers. What advice do you have for students who work with patients experiencing substance use disorders?
Yeah, what advice do we have for pharmacists that are encountering folks with substance use disorders, which it doesn't matter the setting that we're in, obviously all of us are. This is a universal problem, doesn't discriminate. And again, as I kind of alluded to, how you come off and how you're perceived and what energy you put off is something that folks that are struggling with SUD or being treated for SUD are very attuned to. And a lot of that is not necessarily our fault. As you can imagine, these folks have bounced around the healthcare system. They've been marginalized. They've been judged. They've been criticized in many cases by other healthcare providers. And by extension, they're expecting that when they walk up and encounter you because you're another healthcare provider. And part of that is the disease that they say, I failed. The healthcare system tried to help me and I failed it. I betrayed it. That's part of the disease. So there's shame. A big part of that is shame that comes with that and embarrassment. So anything you can do to lower that barrier is going to be helpful. And the way I tell folks to approach it with patients is regardless of where you are in your career, always play the student when you're dealing with a patient with SUD. And honesty is the key. If you have personal experience with this and you are only if you are comfortable sharing that with a patient, that will help bring some of that down. Look, I've never experienced this myself, but I watched my dad struggle with alcoholism throughout my childhood. So I understand a little bit. How can I help? It's that simple. And that may sound like pie in the sky to some of you, but it's not. It doesn't take some complex intervention. We don't have to start talking about drug screening tools and motivational. That's all important. All is important. But the challenge is getting the initial connection with these patients. So be conscious of how you're carrying yourself. Be conscious of how you approach them. Be conscious of what your opening is when you start that conversation. And say, look, you know, I'll be honest, as a pharmacist, we don't learn a ton about this in school. Or you can say, I took an elective on this and I learned a lot about it, so I want to learn more. So I'm here as a resource for whatever you need me to be. So if I can help you in any way throughout your recovery journey, you always know where to find me. Just come up and just give a wave and we can come over and talk somewhere privately. And let's be honest, some people are going to maybe use some colorful terms or finger gestures until you say no thanks. But you will have other people, and I guarantee you this will be most, that'll thank you. And they may not take advantage of it the first time, but maybe the second or third time they come in, they will. It doesn't take a lot. Great question.
And I will turn it over back to our DC audience. Does anybody have a question from the audience for Dr. Nichols?
I know you talked about how the brain of people struggling with addiction would tell them that they don't need help.
Yeah.
So how can we encourage them into taking the first initiative step into the recovery process?
Yeah. You know, just there's a lot of education around, for a patient perspective, letting them know that treatment is effective. And there's a lot of notions that are worth us dispelling, especially as it relates to medications. You know, one good example might be, I don't want to get on Suboxone because I feel like I'm trading one habit for another, one opioid for another, right? Who is better to explain why that's not the case than us? Dispelling some of those notions, talking about treatment does work. You just have to find the right spot. And one of the other simple things that you can do is just basically print out a list of resources and leave it somewhere on the pharmacy counter or on your desk. And again, you don't have to hand them out because people might get a little offended, think, oh, I don't have a drug problem, you know? But if you leave it there and somebody has the option to take it with them, and that could be lists of local counselors or therapists, it could be links to telemedicine treatment programs, which are increasingly popular and here to stay at least through next year. And we need those because we have a huge treatment void in behavioral health and addiction. It could be info on local AA or NA meetings. It could be info that you printed off of NIDA's website, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or SAMHSA's website. Educational information on addiction. Never assume that anybody understands that they have a disease. That's another great role when you get into that. If you sense that, have that discussion as to why it's a disease. Explain that to people. It's very, very helpful. It was very helpful for me.
Thank you. Well, let's give him another round of applause as we introduce our next speaker.
Thank you.